Welcome to Turtle Island Talks, an exclusive SiriusXM town hall.
Authorities in Canada have uncovered the remains of 215 children, some as young as 3 years old.
A Canadian Indigenous group says it found the unmarked graves of more than 700 people at a Catholic residential school in Saskatchewan this week.
We have hit 751 unmarked graves.
It's a hard number to estimate. I mean, the records indicate, probably 800 or more, but that's just the ones that are in the records.
Using ground-penetrating radar, 3 communities within Canada have announced the finding of more than 1,000 unmarked graves.
Since May this year, over 1,300 remains or unmarked graves have been found near former residential schools for Indigenous children in Canada.
In recognition of the Inaugural National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, our first edition of this series will commemorate the tragic legacy of residential schools in Canada, while honoring the children who never made it home. Please welcome our host, Pam Palmater, a Mi'kmaq lawyer from Eel River Bar First Nation and the chair in Indigenous Governance at Ryerson University.
Tansei Sego Anibuju. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this very special day, September 30th, the first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, an official federal holiday. Ever since the revelation of the 251 unmarked graves in Secwepemc territory at the former residential school in Kamloops, more and more unmarked graves continue to be found by Indigenous communities all over Canada. This reality, though long known to Indigenous peoples, came as a shock to many Canadians. Today's show is dedicated to truth and reconciliation, and we have an incredible list of Indigenous leaders, musicians, and artists from all different backgrounds and fields to talk about the importance of today. To this end, today's show is going to focus on just that, truth, reconciliation, and justice, and our hopes that Canadians will take up the call for self-education about residential schools and all of the Truth and Reconciliation reports calls to action, and then take steps to implement those. And it is my incredible honor to introduce Elder Barb Nepinak, who's going to share with us a special land acknowledgement and a prayer.
Anin Tansei. Barbara Nepinak Indigenous. My traditional name is Toot Thunderbird Woman, Nijobine Sikwe, and I'm from the Bear Clan. We are here on Turtle Island. We are on Treaty 1 territory, and I'd like to welcome all First Nations, all original landowners of Turtle Island. It is important that we all acknowledge each other, that we come from all nations and all 4 directions. And this is what I'd like to do today. And I'd like to extend a prayer for all of us, for our families, for our communities. And I will do so in my Ojibwe language. Keni na mahagi meshiga kweche megwan, chep megagi somak kishe manitu. Chishawene megwan, chawabante egwan me no be mati siwen. Chisagi tiang, chamanachi tiang magab museng king. Ambe hogitene magatinanek ka kusiot. Misiega shekushinowat. Kitabin honchi minanek, kitane kopajinanek ka kusiot. Ungoya kapita kodisot, kabinikoyot kebu. Mikiwi no ngente shiboko senda mama, no be mati siwen chani babandamuat. Mata shenong shamaneto, shiboko senmak. Mi wata no go me jiga. Ogo senda man weno go gagi jiga. Ke chinenda go twe be mati siwen. Ambe we me ho we kamme ayam akwe akuzin pandemic. Kajni kata muat. Iga babitu omene anishie. Iga nisha washkamen. Ambe ngo ting iga nipa women nigan. Nigan ke nipa women ge wena kame ke go gagi tawiya. Anishina bek. How me what no go me could do me west naked no baggage. Kita me konnem and I embrace you all. Thank you.
Walalan to Elder Nepinak for those special words. Now let's welcome John Lewis, the Senior Vice President of Programming at SiriusXM Canada, to help us open this event.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Before I begin, SiriusXM recognizes our office is located on the land of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We're very grateful to share this space. I'd like to thank all of our panelists and guests for making themselves available to participate in this special programming. And I'd like to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in. Today is the first observance of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. However, as you may be aware, many Canadians have been observing Orange Shirt Day on this day each year since 2013. With this town hall and working with our guests and panelists, we're hoping to provide a space for listening and learning while promoting awareness about the residential school experience in this country and honoring survivors and the children who never made it home. Today is also the first in a town hall series we're calling Turtle Island Talks, a series we're hoping will help carry this conversation forward. While programming for this edition is dedicated to the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, we recognize that one day of reflection per year and 1 hour of dedicated programming won't begin to scratch the surface of our learning about Indigenous experiences. I do hope that these important conversations with our panelists and guests will be a step towards continuing growth for all of us. SiriusXM Canada is committed to continuing to build diverse programming on the Indigiverse channel, as well as ongoing collaboration with our other channels. We've also been working closely with our staff and Indigenous employees to expand our training through a Diversity and Inclusion Council. And we felt that an obvious first step would be to observe September 30th as a day for reflection or participation in community. I look forward to this ongoing journey of learning the truth and putting reconciliation into action. I'm proud to be part of it. Pam, I'd like to thank you again for agreeing to host this conversation, and I'll send it back to you.
Thanks so much. And thank you for that important message. I too am really excited about today's event, which is really to honor First Nations, Métis, and Inuit together with our Canadian friends, allies, and supporters. And what we've done today is invited this group of amazing Indigenous influencers from entertainment, sports, news, comedy, and beyond to talk to us about reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and the path forward. We've also invited some of our non-Indigenous friends, allies, and supporters to discuss their views on how to put reconciliation into action. People like Mark Chipman, the owner of the Winnipeg Jets, and a few musicians you might know, but we'll let that come up later. Let's meet our panelists very quickly. We have retired NHL player Jordin Tootoo. We have the amazing comedian Howie Miller, and of course, Mohawk and Anishinaabe journalist and SiriusXM host, Kim Wheeler. Thank you all for joining us. And maybe you could each say hello and let us know what community you're from. Jordin, we'll start with you.
Hey everyone, it's a pleasure being on this show today. I am from Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, born and raised, half Ukrainian, half Inuk. So I have a lot of Indigenous traditions and cultural backgrounds in my life. So I'm very happy to be a part of this this interview.
Well, we're pumped to have you too. Okay, Howie, you're next.
Hi, I'm Howie Miller. I'm from the Paul Band on Treaty 6 land here just west of Edmonton. I am part of the 60s Scoop, so I am learning every day about my culture and my history and how wonderful and beautiful it is. So I'm truly honored to be a part of this panel today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. Okay, Kim, last but not least.
Anine Sago, my name is Kim Wheeler. I am also part of the 60s Scoop. I am registered at Seguin First Nation, but my maternal bloodline comes from Sandy Bay and my paternal bloodline comes from Six Nations of the Grand River.
Well, it's awesome to have you here. And for those of you who don't know, I'm from Eel River Bar First Nation. That's part of the larger Mi'kmaq Nation. I'm so excited. And our first panel discussion is really going to be about are Canadians engaged enough right now in this important conversation? And Jordin, maybe we can start with you. Do you think Canadians really understand the residential school experience?
To be honest, I don't think everyone, your average Canadian doesn't quite, aren't educated on, the history of what went on. But obviously, in today's age, the conversations are getting a lot more rampant, and people are starting to listen. I think for a lot of our people, we want people to listen and just hear us out, not necessarily come up with all the answers in one discussion, because that's certainly not going to happen. But overall, I would say over the last couple of years, things have really moved forward in a positive way.
Well, that's good to hear. And it's especially important to understand, too, that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit have all different experiences. Are there any experiences that are unique to your community?
Well, I firsthand, my father has been to residential school, and, unfortunately, that the topic, whenever I'm around my father, I try and, dig a little here and there, and, it's pretty tough, to unwind and to really be open and honest, is tough. I experience it firsthand in my, upbringing, and, ultimately, I think as time moves on, the discussions will get a lot more better with clarity and content, and I hope one day, my father will be able to come out of his shell and share some of his experiences.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know it's not easy. These are, intergenerational issues that we're talking about here. And, Howie, in the same vein, do you think that the revelation of the unmarked graves has impacted Canadians enough to have a consistent push, call for accountability on governments and a consistent push for action?
No, it gets pushed to the wayside more often than not. And that's the really frustrating thing. This needs to be a daily reminder, it seems. Governments, let's have an election out of the blue all of a sudden, and let's forget about, what really matters. Fortunately, though, there's a lot of educated youth that are non-Indigenous that want to know more. And I think that's where the social media can help. When something is displayed in such a way that the original 215 graves were found, it shocked the nation. We knew it for a long time. We don't know how many, but we know it's way more than that. But to have non-Indigenous children react in a positive way, and when I say positive, they want to know more. When they go home and ask their parents about this, and sometimes their parents don't know about it, they didn't know about it, which is good because it lends the sort of train of knowledge. Again, I'm part of the 60s Scoop. I grew up, I tell everyone it was like a John Hughes movie. That's how I grew up in the 80s. My elementary school I was the only Indigenous person there. I drove past there, I think that about a week after the original graves were found, and I saw that my schoolyard was covered with flowers that the students had made in honor of that. And I thought that was such a huge change from when I was there, because I encountered a lot of racism when I was growing up, being raised in Edmonton in the 80s. It wasn't so comfortable for me, but to see the change that kids can have, the impact of such a tragic thing, is amazing to me. And we need to keep that motion, that train, keep going forward. And it has to be reminded of every day. And I think the governments and all the parties involved need to keep the constant pressure and keep it going.
That's so important, especially given the links between residential schools, the 60s Scoop, and today's foster care crisis. Now, for people who don't know what the 60s Scoop is, would you mind just briefly saying what is the 60s Scoop, Howie?
during the 60s and 70s, a lot of Indigenous children were taken off the reservation because their parents weren't deemed worthy enough of raising them. So they were adopted out to non-Indigenous families. And for the most part, this had a detrimental effect on these children. I say some, I mean, I grew up in a very stable environment. My parents were very loving and I never encountered any abuse. The only abuse I found was I wasn't a part of where I was from. I lost my identity. I lost my name. I lost my language and my history and my culture. That's had detrimental effect in the future of myself. So that's where that comes in. But a lot of these children, my brothers included in this, suffered a lot of abuse in these homes. So, when they say they scooped us up and took us off, that's exactly what they did. And, the government can say it how they want to say it. It's just another way of this continued cultural genocide that I see that's continuing to this day.
Well, and it's important for people to see those connections. Thanks for sharing that. I know that's not easy. Now, Kim, my question to you really is, there's been so much focus on education and awareness, and that's so important. But when do we move to sustained action, to go from awareness to action?
Well, I think, people can start moving in that direction now and people are still being educated. We do have allies and supporters who have started making those moves towards concrete action. And look at Sirius, they're hosting this right now, where a year ago, it might not have happened. 10 years ago, stories like the stories that are being covered in the way they're being covered by the media weren't happening. Within the education system, people are really starting to listen. I was thinking about this young girl who went to my high school, who decided she was going to sit for the national anthem. And it was a national story, and the teachers weren't having it, but the principal stepped in and understood. And so, those are concrete things that are happening right now. And if we keep hearing those stories, reconciliation, I think, can start to slowly move forward, but there's still a lot more to be done.
It's so true. And, I'm noticing here, sitting here listening to all of you, the links that we all have to residential schools, even if we didn't personally go. I mean, Kim, you said you were 60s Scoop, Howie's 60s Scoop, and Jordin's father went to residential schools. We can literally reach out and touch people who have been impacted in a multitude of ways. How important, Kim, do you think it is that, it's Indigenous peoples telling these stories and leading the way forward?
I think it's incredibly important because it's our story, and only we can understand it with the empathy and impact to tell it properly. Mm-hmm. When you say that we've all been affected by this intergenerationally, I think about my own children, and I think that they're the first generation in my family that has not, gone to residential school. They're not part of the 60s Scoop. They were raised in a loving home with two parents. And, to have that makes me really proud that I was able to give that to my children.
Well, thank you all for sharing this. I know it's a very heavy topic, and it shows just how important it is that we engage in education on this topic. And that is, in fact, the next topic for our panel. It's reconciliation in education.
Call to action number 62. We call upon the federal, provincial, and territorial governments, in consultation and collaboration with survivors, Aboriginal peoples, and educators, to make age-appropriate curriculum on residential schools, treaties, and Aboriginal peoples, historical and contemporary contributions to Canada, a mandatory education requirement for kindergarten to grade 12 students.
So please, let's all welcome the one and only Cree singer, songwriter, musician, visual artist, public educator, and social justice activist, Buffy Sainte-Marie, and Harriet Visitor, who's also a community leader, educator, social justice advocate. And both of these women sit as board of directors on the Gord Downey and Cheney Wenjack Fund.
Buju Kakana Oya. I'm Harriet Visitor. I sit on the board for the Downey Wenjack Fund, a fund created in memory of my late Uncle Cheney Wenjack. And I have been watching and learning about Buffy since I was a little girl. And I've told her many times that I'm able to do what I do because of what you did at a time when speaking on Indigenous issues was very hard on your career and very hard on you. And I thank you for constantly speaking and not giving up, because you've given us that voice now today because of what you've done. I sit on the board with Buffy. I met her through the board, and very honored to listen to her and to sit across from her.
Thank you. Thank you, Harriet, for those nice words about me. And I really, truly, and sincerely send it right back to you, because when I was a young singer in the 60s, doing it kind of all by myself, with the support of grassroots people at Pie Potts Reserve, who became my new family, it was people like yourself who I was learning from and looking to in terms of creating a better future for people of all ages of Indigenous backgrounds, but especially, of course, for children. And, you know, the item number 62, you know, on our calls to action, when it talks about making age-appropriate curriculum about residential schools, treaty and Aboriginal peoples' historical and contemporary contributions to Canada, a mandatory education requirement for kindergarten to grade 12 students. I'm just all over that. I'm just right on top of that. A long time ago, I started a program that ran for over 20 years called the Cradleboard Teaching Project. I wish we could bring it to Canada one of these days, but essentially what we were doing kind of anticipated this beautiful statement, this beautiful call to action. You know, I think people are unaware of how much, as Aboriginal people, as Indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, how much was going on in our lives before we were ever attacked from the outside, how connected we were, North America, Central America, South America, all of the things that were going on in our lives, you know, the scientific achievements and the government, the developments in government and in agriculture and so many things. So my Cradleboard Teaching Project kind of addressed those things, but we did not at the time have the support of people like the Downey Wenjack Fund. And the horror of residential schools is not new to us. And I think it's always a touchy issue. How do we deal with this with children? And I have a question for you, Harriet. Really, it's on behalf of people who are almost totally unfamiliar with what's going on today, because I know a lot of non-Indigenous people are totally shocked. They had no idea. Well, they should have known because it was in the newspapers. It was common knowledge. But these days we pretend that nobody knew what was going on. And so I'd like to ask you, Harriet, why do you think that it's important that we start teaching children at a young age about residential schools?
I guess I would have to answer in the context of my life. When I attended the Secret Path concert in Ottawa, we were walking home. I was walking with my son and my daughter. I often say that my son is the reason I taught, or the reason I teach, the reason I became a teacher. And my daughter is the how I teach. And I was always careful, or would look at how she would make connections or what connections she would make. She was only 6, 7 at the time when she met Gord. And when we watched the concert, and we saw the Secret Pack concert, my son said, this story will resonate with all levels and all ages. And I said, explain that to me. And he says, well, you have the graphic novel, the comic, that the children will look at the comic and it's like a wordless book, and they'll come to their own understanding and their own conversations with what they're seeing. They're very visual. And he says, you have the music, you have the words, the poetry that will reach youth, young adults, to our elders. Then the next day, my daughter says to me, I wonder who Gord Downey's parents are. And I asked her, what do you mean? And she says, I'd like to know who his parents are. She looked beyond the story, beyond what she saw, and she wanted to know where he came from. So I knew that children at a young age were going to make those connections. If my daughter, who is 6 and 7 or 6, 7 at the time, it resonated with her and she kept it. All she knows at the time was, this is my Cookum's little brother. But she brought that book in, she sang a song, she read the book to her classmates. So I know that when bringing our story and our history to our children, teaching them at a young age about residential schools, it's their story too. I've often said that this story, the Secret Path story, is not just my family story, but it's the story of 150,000 Indigenous children. It's a story of 300,000 set of parents, 600,000 set of grandparents. That's huge. That's our community. And with everything that happened in May, with the finding of 215 children in Kamloops, I felt that. I felt the enormity of what my students were feeling, trying to make sense of what they were hearing and feeling, and looking at us as educators while we're teaching online to help them make sense of what they're feeling, to acknowledge what they were feeling. And as educators, we answer to many of those difficult stories.
One of the things that I've often seen missing in public education has been a genuine sense of child-friendly. And I was on Sesame Street for a long time. And what was great about Sesame Street, it was genuinely child-centered, child-friendly. But so often in schools, it's like we're thinking about our administration, our schedules, all of this administrative stuff. And everybody is so busy that sometimes I think the children's needs are almost last in line. And, one of the things that you and I, Harriet, have talked about before and that we're talking about now led to a question: why is it important for Indigenous people to lead in the creation of Indigenous education for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous students? And I got some stuff to say about that. And the biggest thing is because we already know, most teachers in public education, whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, don't learn stuff. We don't learn what we need to know. And certainly the generation of teachers who taught us and the generation who taught them, they didn't know diddly squat about us. And it just wasn't an important thing. What was important in those days was how they handle us and keep us in line. And, when I was running the Cradle Board Teaching Project, I didn't ask the Mohawks to teach about the Apaches. I gave the Mohawks an opportunity to teach about themselves and to give to their partner classes, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, whatever it was that they wanted the world to know about themselves specifically. One of the ways that I did in the Cradle Board Teaching Project, that I do in my songs and my public presentations in a concert or a speech, I don't want to leave people with only the horror. I feel as though as an artist and as a teacher, both, one of the things that I can do, because I've had a wonderful life and I've had a wonderful education and I've been with a lot of Indigenous people, I know what's cool. And I know what is not being taught in schools. They don't teach any of the cool stuff. Another thing that we have that we need to be sharing with children are the contributions that we have made as people of the Western Hemisphere. 2/3 of what the world eats today wasn't discovered by Indians wandering around picking berries. No, it was hybridized, cultivated, developed. And people walked feet and rode whatevers and spread the information in cultural diffusion, so that something that originated with the Mayas in Central America, it went all the way to Canada and all the way to South America. They don't know about our agriculture, about our skills in our inventions and technology, our skills in government, all the different forms of government that were going on in the Western Hemisphere. They just don't know about us when we were really lively people. Our contributions to science, things like cranial surgery and anesthetic, used in operations, architecture and astronomy, and major developments, the rubber bulb syringe, scads and scads of medicines. We're the ones who can teach this. And another reason why, Harriet, sometimes when you and I talk, we talk about why we should be leading. So it's not as though an education committee can come in from government somewhere and do this for us. We know what to do. We got a lot of teachers now. We didn't in the 60s when I was starting out, but now we've got people like you, Harriet. And I believe that we're up to this. I believe that it's a terribly hard thing that we're doing, but I do believe an Indigenous consciousness in public education would be a major contribution to public education worldwide. We have not yet shared our song. We haven't yet shared all the things that we have to share. But we got a lot of master's degrees, a lot of PhDs, and a lot of grassroots people who know things that even the PhDs don't know. So I'm very excited about working on with the Downey Wenjack Fund and on the board in the education committee with you, Harriet, because I think the combination of your grassroots experience with kids and the fact that I've been lucky enough to travel around and see how things work in other Indigenous communities in other parts of the world, because it gives me a very clear picture about what the problem is. And it's not us, and it's not being rural. No, it's this system from outside. The system needs to change. We need every heartful comment that we can get. We need a lot of brains and a lot of heart in order to balance this canoe, in order to paddle on both sides so that our children are truly learning about our horror history. They've got to know so that it won't happen anymore. And then you paddle on this side and you teach them about all the contributions that have been made by the people on this side of the water to the entire world. And that's, I think, by paddling on both sides of the canoe, that's how you make your way forward.
I could literally listen to Buffy and Harriet all day. These two women have multiple lifetimes of wisdom and experience, and you can just hear the love and compassion in their voices. And, they make a good point. We could learn so much from each other just by taking the time to sit down and listen. And I think, now is just as good a time as any to come together in a good way. The federal election is now finally behind us. The Liberals won another minority government, which means all parties are going to have to work together to move forward on reconciliation. Kim, maybe I'll start with you this time. What do you think the government's first priority should be in terms of moving forward on their reconciliation agenda?
Clean drinking water for all First Nations in this country. It's so simple. It was a promise they made last time and they didn't live up to it. And that's should be their very first priority.
Of course. I mean, it's taken for granted by so many Canadians just to have access to clean water, but things like housing and food insecurity, all of these things are issues. Howie, how can we move beyond politics? Because often the discussion around reconciliation with Indigenous peoples is inside of federal politics, provincial politics, and people arguing. How can we move beyond that and engage directly with Canadians and move forward together on reconciliation?
Education, first and foremost, educating our youth and bringing them up in a world that, like Buffy was saying, that's equal on both sides. So there's equal stories. When I was growing up, I remember I was talking to my son and I said in grade 9, I was learning about Tsar Nicholas. Well, why was I learning about the Tsar of Russia and his hemophiliac son? And my son, who was in university at the time, said, it's because they were your parents' enemies. So the education system was designed to, let's learn about Russia because they're the enemies. So if you know about your enemies, you'll be able to battle them or whatever. So, and this was in the 80s that I was learning about this. So like, why not learn about my country, about who I am? Because I would be in school and people would ask me, they weren't being ignorant. They would say, you know, how do you build a teepee? Like, I don't know. I would love to know though. So stuff like that was hard for me. And I think that's, you know, let's learn about our first people. We were the first voice. We should have that knowledge passed down to our youth. So, and my son has gone on now to graduate with honors at the National Theatre School and has his own web series. And I'm very proud of him. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, congratulations to him. That's just fantastic. That's the kind of cool stuff we want to hear. And I want to pick up on something that Buffy said, because she's talking about, we don't hear in the education system enough about our cool people doing cool things. And, you know, I think of Jordin Tootoo. You're a cool person doing cool things. And so many young people look up to you. How important is it that we directly engage with youth on these conversations?
Well, the youth are our future, right? And for me personally, it's about stopping one cycle and starting a new cycle, not only for my kids, but for myself. You know, I go back to my childhood. You know, I love my parents more than I ever did today than in the past. You know, I don't resent them for how we grew up. I'm actually grateful because I got to experience a side of my life that, you know, I wouldn't necessarily teach my kids. You know, the verbal, the physical abuse, the yelling, the chaos, the dysfunction in the household. You know, I look at it as a learning curve. You know, I entered rehab in 2010 to allow myself to be able to be at this point in my life to share my experience and to show people that it doesn't matter where you come from. We as Indigenous people are resilient. We need each other to move forward. And, you know, the divisions that go on amongst our people needs to change because we can't do it by ourselves. We need everybody. When I got out of rehab in 2010, I grew up always being told that men don't cry, men don't show weakness. You know, we're tough. We're tough as nails. But in order for me to come to realization that, you know, when I'm comfortable and content in my own skin, I'm able to share what I experience with gratitude and with a point of allowing other people to hear what we've been through. You know, I don't share my story for people to feel sorry for me. Mm-hmm. I don't share my story to expose my family. I share it because now is a time for change. I want my two daughters to know what their heritage is, and you know, although they're 5 and 3 years old, they know where Nunavut is. They know where grandma and grandpa live. It's about educating. It's about showing them pictures and letting their imagination fill their brains with you know, all the great stuff that we as Indigenous people we're allowed to do. You know, when you grow up in a remote community, more often than not, you are able to just be a kid and be outside and live in the open, and experience life that, you know, your average Canadian has no clue about. Sometimes we take advantage of, you know, so a lot of times when I was a kid, you take for granted what's in front of you. And until you leave home to pursue your dreams, to pursue your goals, it's always going to be there. To me, home is always going to be home no matter what. And I am forever grateful that I'm able to go home and share and learn from my dad, from being out on the land. I was just home for 10 days up in Rankin Inlet, Nunavut. And within those 10 days, there were 3 suicides in my community. And I said to myself, like, what can I do to change this? And I know, we all know this is a national epidemic in our communities, in the Indigenous communities. It's about educating the your average Canadian who thinks they know what the history is, but actually just conversating about our experiences and sharing and having and being able to see both sides of the stories, right? A lot of times people just want to hear one side, their side, the side that they feel more comfortable hearing. They don't want any tension. You know, for us Indigenous people, we just want people to hear us out. And I think it's really moving in a positive direction. I grew up in a home where not a lot was talked about at the dinner table. You shut the doors, you close the blinds, and you shut up and you put up with whatever's in front of you. And I feel that in today's era, in today's generation, it's time to move forward. It's time to open those doors. It's time to connect with each other, help each other find the strength from within to share your story and to let go and to move forward and to lift weight off your shoulders. You know, there are many opportunities where I wanted to ask my dad those tough questions, but there was always this wall that would come up in that moment where this scared little boy would pop in front of me, and I would, and the scared little boy would say, no, this is not the time to ask dad. And I was like that for many years until, you know, the revelations of the Kamloops findings arose in the media and stuff. And that's when I, you know, sat down and thought to myself, wow, like, is my family been affected by this? And it sure has. And now it's just about, you know, letting my dad know that I love him no matter what. I am truly grateful to be his son and that he's still around. But it's going to take time, right? To find that inner strength in my dad. And it's just about chipping away and conversating.
Exactly. And, it's so important that you have the courage to share these experiences, because our young kids and our youth can look and say, look, I don't have to have had a perfect life with no experiences. I don't have to be free of hardship to be able to go and live my dreams, that we can still have, had hard times and find ways forward. We can still have difficulties, fall down and get back up and keep trying. And I think, all three of you really emulate that, this, people that we can look up to, who are real people who with lived experiences, and we can share all of that. So thank you. And especially for sharing all of that, Jordin, because our kids are hearing about this. And, before we talk to our next guest, I think it's important to look at some of the calls to action that related specifically to unmarked graves, some of those calls to action that weren't acted on.
Call to action number 74 and 75. We call upon the federal government to work with the churches and Aboriginal community leaders to inform the families of children who died at residential schools of the child's burial location, and to respond to families' wishes for appropriate commemoration, ceremonies, and markers, and reburial in home communities where requested. We call upon the federal government to work with provincial, territorial, and municipal governments, churches, Aboriginal communities, former residential school students, and current landowners to develop and implement strategies and procedures for the ongoing identification, documentation, maintenance, commemoration, and protection of residential school cemeteries or other sites at which residential school children were buried.
And we had a very special guest who joined us to come and talk about this very serious issue. Please welcome National Chief RoseAnne Archibald, the first female National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. Thanks again for joining us, National Chief. I'd love to find out your opinion on what role do you think that Canadians can play in addressing the lingering issues around all of these unmarked graves?
Our allies, non-Indigenous allies, can actually reach out to their governments, so their MPs, their MPPs, their mayors, and really get them to ensure that we have proper memorials. So right now, for example, there was a discussion around the flag at half-mast in Ottawa. And, how do you begin to replace that very meaningful symbolic gesture with something that honors the lives of our little ones that are being recovered at these schools? And so it's really our allies who will tell governments that it's not enough to say, okay, it's time to lower or to raise the flag again. There has to be some kind of action. And I also think that it's important for allies to reach out to the First Nations around them, communities around them, to be able to get answers from First Nations as opposed to coming up with their own solutions.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because one of the concerns is every time there's an issue for First Nations and people have great ideas, they want to go ahead with that. Government is the worst. And so I'm wondering, how do you think we can make sure that it's Indigenous peoples and Indigenous families and communities leading the way on the solutions for unmarked graves?
It's really important for the federal government, who is taking the lead on this issue, to be checking in with the various levels of leadership across the country, right from the community level all the way up to the regional and national level on the path forward. We developed a document for the election called the Healing Path Forward, and it really outlines that principle of doing something together, that we're walking that road together, that the government is not off running ahead of us, and more importantly, that we're not walking that road alone. And so they really have to shift their thinking, because there's still a real paternalism that exists in Canada where governments, they do research, they do risk analysis, they do all kinds of this work that helps them to make decisions. But where they seem to be really lacking is in working at the community level with chiefs and councils and even members who are knowledge keepers in particular areas, and coming up with solutions that work for everyone. So it's about meeting each other halfway. So government can't impose solutions, and First Nations have to also find that middle road when it comes to their own solutions, but they have to ultimately be community-driven solutions.
Well, thank you so much, National Chief, for sharing these thoughts with Canadians and everybody who's listening, so that we can all walk this path forward together. Thanks again.
Thank you, Pam. Take care.
There are so many dimensions to reconciliations with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities that go beyond just politics or law or economic analysis. We can't forget about the important roles of things like the role of the arts, which we'll get to in a little bit. And of course, reconciliation in sports. Indigenous peoples are big players in terms of sports. Let's look at the next call to action.
Call to action number 90. We call upon the federal government to ensure national sports policies, programs, and initiatives are inclusive of Indigenous peoples, including but not limited to anti-racism and awareness training programs, and an elite athlete development program for Indigenous athletes.
Now I'm really excited to welcome Canadian country musician Don Amero and the owner of the Winnipeg Jets, Mark Chipman, to talk about reconciliation in sports.
We went through a really challenging, soul-searching experience this past spring. Which ended up in your version of the anthem against
that whole thing. I relive it quite often, actually, because it's only a couple of months ago now.
Right.
My neighbor said Don Amero should be singing the anthem, and I texted you and I said, hey, they just yelled I should sing the anthem, and I've sang the anthem a couple of times at this point, and you said we can make that happen, and then so I'm excited about the possibility of singing the anthem at a playoff game, and then 48 hours later we heard about the news about the 215 kids they found in Kamloops, BC, and who suffered at the hands of, the life of being in residential school. And then that altered a bit of our conversation about the anthem. And, we started seeing upside down flags and led to you and I kind of saying, what's the right step here? And I know that because the Jets organization is already doing a lot of work in this area, that wrestling that I felt, I think that as an organization, you were feeling the same.
Yeah, very much so. And I think we were both fortunate that we were able to lean on another friendship that we have with Kevin Chief, who has been, just a dear friend over many, many years. And just trying to sort out what's the right thing to do. I think it all caught us so off guard. And we were coming off this celebration of finally beating the Oilers, and now you're going into a series against the Montreal Canadiens, and there's ordinarily a lot of excitement, and I think just the whole country got stopped dead in their tracks, and so it was difficult to figure out what the right solution would be to that first game. But credit to you, I think it had its intended effect.
That's a moment that I already know long into old age for me. I'll remember that because I think that was a real catalyst for a lot of really deep conversations that have been had up till now and that we're continuing to have hopefully for long into the future. Now, the Jets as an organization, I would say, this term reconciliation, the organization here, from my perspective, has been doing a lot of work in that area for a long time, and long before the TRC was even out.
It started with a desire just to make the game more accessible. I was fortunate enough to grow up, play the game. My kids grew up playing the game, but as I watched their experiences and I coached them through those years, it was easy to understand that the game had become far less accessible. We claim it as our national sport, but how do we make the game of hockey more accessible? And that led us down a path that with Kevin Chief, who had started an organization called WASAC, the Winnipeg Aboriginal Sport Achievement Center. We had this desire, but really didn't understand the pathways in. We created this program through the public school system in schools that, the province determined to be underserved. We started with this very small, modest program of 25 kids. And the year before COVID, I think we had 900 kids in the program. And because of the socioeconomic circumstance of those schools, the vast majority of those kids, not all, but a good deal of those kids are of Indigenous ethnicity, lots of new Canadians as well. And that sort of started us on that path, right? Mm-hmm. And we were just trying to make the game accessible to kids that weren't able to play it. And in our community, regrettably, a number of those kids are Indigenous.
From my perspective, and I can't speak for other NHL teams out there, but I get this sense, and you're my home team. It seems to me like this organization is a leader. And, oftentimes corporations, big businesses tend to sort of tackle the land acknowledgement first. And that seems like a first step. And I think you guys are well beyond that. And one of the things I thought was really exciting to see is an NHL team with an Indigenous logo. Can you tell me how that was born?
One of the things we started to do years ago was a Follow Your Dreams night, where we would actually bring a large number of kids down from northern Manitoba for the weekend to catch a game. This is before our return to the NHL. And it just sort of took on a life of its own, where it became sort of a celebration night for the Indigenous community at a game. And so then more recently, we decided to take it to another level, and Kevin introduced us to a young woman by the name of Letitia Spence, who we asked to sort of come on board for a period of time and indigenize our two logos. And it was a remarkable process, to observe, and she came up with these two really, really cool logos. And so, in fact, you could almost see them through the glass here, ironically or coincidentally. But on that game night, we wear those jerseys in warm up, and I'm hoping one day we'll be able to wear them, during a game. And the league has some restrictions around what kind of, how often you can change your uniform up, et cetera. But it's been selling like crazy, which is great because WASAC, who I mentioned earlier, have been the beneficiary of those proceeds. And it you see people wearing it with pride, and not just Indigenous people. And there was a moment, the first year we did it, and we invited this young choir to sing the anthem. And they did it in Ojibwe, but then we have this shout out during our anthem where everybody screams True North. True North, yeah. And on cue, everybody did it. And the applause that those kids got still sort of, gives you a jolt when you think about it. It was really a meaningful event in our chronology. So now the trick is how do you make it a little bit better every year? That's our challenge now.
I don't doubt you guys will find a way.
Yeah. Well, we're going to try. Yeah.
Great insight into some of the ways that Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples can work together in sport to start addressing some of the issues. And one of the issues that often doesn't get covered enough in sports is ongoing racism against Indigenous peoples in sports. And I think it's an important issue that we need to talk about. And Jordin, I'm going to lead with you. What kind of action can we take to continue to erase racism from sports?
Well, I myself firsthand have dealt with a lot of racism throughout my hockey career and in the sporting world. I have a great relationship with Mark Chipman and the Winnipeg Jets there. And, kudos to what they got going on there to recognize our Indigenous cultures and traditions. My question is, why isn't the other Canadian NHL teams doing any of that stuff? I feel like, the Winnipeg Jets have been the catalyst behind the recognitions of our people. But truth be told, it's happened right across Canada. And, you know, if you want to get this on a national level, I think, you know, every Canadian National Hockey League club needs to get on board or have a meeting with Mark Chipman to, you know, come up with some great ideas right across the country to allow our people to feel that we are a part of, you know, this great sport. Racism, it is, you know, it's been an ongoing battle for many decades. And, you know, even in the professional world, me as an NHL player had a lot of players taunt me and say racial slurs towards me. Prior to entering rehab in 2010, I had been playing in the NHL for, 8 years. I, was involved with a lot of racism amongst, players that I played against. And, it made me angry. So what did I do? I fought a lot. I used alcohol to suppress my feelings, and I would look myself in the mirror and say, why are people picking on me like this? Why are people attacking me, in my personal life? When I got out of rehab, I had educated myself on a lot of things. And one of the things that, I made myself aware of is that, I have to be proud of who I am and where I come from. When you become comfortable and content in your own skin, which, for me, it took probably 5 years in recovery to get to this point. But, now I look at that individual who had made those racial slurs and say, hey, are you okay? What's going on? What demons are you battling? Because ultimately, I can't control what other people say or what they do towards me. All I can control are my actions. And now with clarity in my brain, I'm able to process the situation in that moment with pride and joy and say, hey, look I'm able to go to bed at night with ease because I am my true version of me. The question I have for a lot of guys that I played against was, hey, like, how'd you sleep last night? Because there's a lot of regretting that goes on. And, the sporting world is a great way to allow inclusion. You look at teams who win championships. It's not one individual. It's, a team effort, and on a team, you're going to have multicultural backgrounds. And if everyone's not on the same page, you're not going to be successful. And we as Indigenous people need to allow and open those doors for the outsiders to be able to come in and to just listen to us speak, share our stories. We don't need solutions right now. We know it's going to take many, many decades before we see, the tides changing, and to feel that we are a part of this country. We are the ones that made this country. We are the first people who had, stepped on these grounds, and we need multicultural backgrounds to just hear us out. It's hard for us to share those tough stories, but when we come together and we're in a group, it's much easier. You can't do it by yourself. I thought, with my alcoholism, I always put it off, like, guys, I can do it by myself. No worries. For many years playing in the NHL, I was struggling. And finally I put my hands up and said, I think it's time for me to allow the help that's offered and do the best that I can. And honestly, if that gift wasn't offered to me, I can probably guarantee you I'd be 6 feet under right now. It gave me a whole new life, a whole new look, perspective on life. I have a very healthy family. My wife, Jennifer, we have 2 very beautiful daughters, Sienna and Avery. And, when I look back at my hockey career, although I didn't win the Stanley Cup, my 2 girls are my Stanley Cup. And, I am forever grateful that I am where I am today with my wife, Jennifer, and my family.
Well, that's just such an important message for young people whose mental health is actually impacted by racism and hatred. And, you never want to douse the enthusiasm of young Indigenous people who want to go into sports or arts or any of these fields from dealing with that. And your message around getting help, getting those, physical health supports, mental health supports, having support networks, I think that's a really important message. And because we often get difficult messages. And Howie, I'm wondering if you can speak to this, because sometimes racism is so ingrained, people don't see it as racism. And you think of like all of the sports logos and sports mascots. And, when you raise the issue, this is not appropriate. And they say, we're just trying to honor you. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about, to that kind of false, conversation around honoring by dishonoring.
As a comedian, well, first of all, I just want to say that Jordin Tootoo should be the leader of Canada, not the prime minister, the actual leader, somebody who I will vote for and stand behind and raise him up whenever I can. The guy's amazing and I love him. So being a stand-up comedian, I would do a show, and then afterwards, more often than not, a non-Indigenous person would approach me and say, here's one for your show. And it would be the most racist joke I've ever heard. And I'm supposed to sit there and go, that's well, thanks for that. Like, I can't say thank you. I have to, stand up and say, well, I'm glad you enjoyed my performance, but that's an extremely inappropriate thing to say. And I hope you change your mind. But what they're not seeing is the fact that when I bring my Indigenousness up during my set, it's a point of, I'm trying to educate by saying these things happened in our past that are horrible, and not to make light of recent events, but things like when I was growing up and being able to know exactly where I was at any given moment in a department store, because security would always be called to that department. I say it in a joking manner, and it comes across and it gets a chuckle, but it's also educating them. They're like, you know what, that's funny, but it's horrible at the same time, because this is how this person has grown up. And again, if I just want to continue what Jordin is mentioning about how society sees us. They only want to see what's comfortable for them. He said that perfectly. And, when you see quote unquote a drunk Indian, we don't care, he's just a drunk Indian. Well, you have to understand why that person is like that. I myself am a recovering alcoholic, and people don't understand that as Indigenous people, we've only had alcohol in this country for like 600 years. So our bodies can't handle it the way other people's do. But we have the advantage of being able to fix ourselves. So if we fix ourselves and rise above it, we can go down that path, learn from it, and take the best knowledge we can from that and move on forward. Dealing with racism is something I hope I never have to deal with in the future. And as I get more predominant in my field of expertise in show business, I'm holding the door open, and it's a big door because I'm a fat guy. I hold the door open for young entertainers as much as I can, Indigenous entertainers as much as I can, to get through that door and say, look, you need to continue this run of Indigenous entertainers to look up to. My show, Caution May Contain Nuts, I was very adamant that not only would we play the stereotypical, Indigenous men in long hair and buckskins and all, but I would be a space captain. I would be a pirate. I would be all these things that you wouldn't normally see on television as an Indigenous person, because we're always typecasted riding around on horses with long hair. I can't ride a horse because I'm quite large. I wouldn't want to be riding without my shirt on because that's just too much of me. But I can be a space captain. I can be a pirate. And to show these young Native kids when I go to these communities and do my show afterwards, to say, hey, you were on that show and you played a pirate. Yeah, because we can be pirates. We can be spacemen. We can be doctors and lawyers and firemen and police chiefs. I played a police chief. So I just want to be able to show that we can be part of it all. And we should be part of it all. When it comes to sports and everything else, we're the first people here. And I've said this before, Canada landed on us and we need to rise above. We should be the kings and queens of this land. Yet we're not. We're treated like paupers. We don't have clean drinking water in some of our communities. We should be running this place. And hopefully our kids and the future generations will get to that point, because like I said, Canada landed on top of us, but we're still growing and we're still growing up, and we're doing it with such strength. Our youth today, I'm so proud of them. And I'm so proud of guys like Jordin and everyone else that has good words to speak. So yeah, hopefully we don't have any more racism in the future.
Well, what a powerful message. And if you're voting for Jordin and I'm voting for Jordin, and we can just get collective agreement on that, I think we can take this country in a whole new direction, Jordin?
Well, if that happens, I probably wouldn't be, I'd probably be fired within minutes after my first speech, because, I'm a black and white person. I tell it how it is. And I ain't sugarcoating anything, right? Like we've gone too long with being told not to speak up, not to speak the truth. And, it's hard for a lot of our people to hear the truth, but we need to hear it in order to move forward. Why is it that we're put on this, this island and say, you guys fend for yourself? It's not going to work that way. We as Indigenous people, we gotta come together as one. And one of my favorite quotes is, I am who I am because we are. Right. I hope in the future that we can all be at the same level. Right. Like although I was a professional hockey player, I don't ever want to put on a higher pedestal than our people. I want to show the world that, I am who I am because we are collectively a healthy, prosperous group of individuals who want to work together.
Fantastic message. And we're going to be jumping into the arts, but just before we do, Kim, I'd like to hear from you really quickly. In sports, as in arts and in any other industry, there's the players, there's the people out front, but then there's a million people behind the scenes, and Indigenous peoples also want to occupy those spaces as being the sports commentator, the sports manager, the sports lawyer, all of these things. And how important is it that there's recognition that we need Indigenous peoples in all of these spaces?
I think it's so important, just like it is for any career path. So, full confession, I'm a Jet season ticket holder. I have a friend who is Anishinaabe who sits up in the press box, and he covers the Jets. And I have friends who also work within the arena, and just to be able to go into those spaces and see our own people, both on the ice, as Ted Nolan was a coach, and to see him come into the building and walk across that ice in front of 30,000 people is so amazing. And then to see the players come on, it's such a sense of pride, and to look up to the press box and know that my friend is up there. It's incredible to know that we are, I guess, infiltrating those spaces and being visible.
That's awesome. Taking up places and spaces, that's our new mission. Well, let's just jump into it, because just like sports, the arts can play such a key role in bringing people together, sharing culture, knowledge, and awareness. So let's look at what the TRC had to say about the arts.
Call to action number 83. We call upon the Canada Council for the Arts to establish as a funding priority a strategy for Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists to undertake collaborative projects and produce works that contribute to the reconciliation process.
Please welcome Canadian country musician Dallas Smith and festival director and music advocate Alan Greyeyes to talk specifically about reconciliation in the arts.
For those of you who don't know, I'm the festival director for the Sagihiwe Festival. We're a small organization. We take music to low-income neighborhoods so Indigenous families can participate in the arts. I also spent the last 17 or 18 years trying to educate myself so that I can help Indigenous artists amplify those messages on stages and any given concert. You're in front of thousands of people, and that's an opportunity to educate those people. Your music videos have a lot of views, like it's hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people watching those.
Yeah.
And I was recently watching Timeless, and I was just thinking like how incredible it would be for you to normalize or make Indigenous people seem normal. Oftentimes, I think in the media, we are portrayed as either criminals or dependents, or politicians or protesters. And I think like it would be wonderful to see an older Indigenous couple celebrating like a timeless love, or maybe things that might be controversial to your audiences. Have you taken those chances yet?
I really don't have any problem speaking my truth and my views on things. I don't get nervous very often, but I'm a little nervous about and I have been nervous about sitting down and talking about this. Because it really is. I recognize how I try not to be ignorant, and I try to be a good person and not view the world in that way. But there are ways that I need to awaken myself to, and I don't know what those are yet, but there's a bunch of them. What message can I pass on to help this process along?
Man, we just need you in the room. We need you speaking up in those rooms where we don't have access. And so maybe if there's stereotypes being portrayed, people are making controversial statements about us, and we just need you in the room having our back and just telling people, we're just as unique and special as their loved ones. I think that goes a long way. And question the things that they've been taught through Disney films or racist team logos, that kind of stuff. Get them to see us as people. I think using every stage to show Canadians that we're just as special and unique as their loved ones. Because again, reconciliation for me is about making Canada a safer place for Indigenous people.
Well, I remember going into a community, I believe it was in Manitoba. It was in northern Manitoba, and we had the green room inside one of the buildings, and we were just kind of hanging out. But I remember feeling like watching just the community, and I really wanted to mingle. And but we were in the room, just like I don't know how welcome I am. I don't know. We're just here. I had never been and played a show in that circumstance before, but we met some great people, and I really wish that I would have gone out there more.
Well, I often feel like when we put concerts on, we're replicating classrooms. And I think not to generalize again, but I think a lot of Indigenous people don't succeed in classrooms, and they don't like the idea of just sitting quietly while somebody at the front of the room says something or does something or sings some notes. And so it's again, I think it's tough when we replicate classrooms. We kind of alienate some Indigenous people. I've often played with the idea of you do the proper concert that some people are going to just love, because obviously you have a big fan base, And then you maybe deconstruct that and just sit by the fire later on and bring the guitar and share some stories and have community members share some songs and some stories too. I think that's the key for a lot of our communities, is the ability to participate, to contribute. And so I think, again, reciprocity plays a big role for a lot of our communities.
Yeah, I think a lot of people share a lot of things in common with grabbing a guitar and just sitting around a fire, no matter what community you're in.
What an awesome conversation. There seems to be a recurring theme about how cool our people are. We have so many skills and talents, and it's really just going to be up to our partners to be fully engaged and make sure that we're represented in all of that. And, we all have a role to play in removing barriers for Indigenous peoples in all fields: sports, arts, entertainment, comedy, lawyers, professors, not being biased here. And that also includes the media and journalism, because they have a lot of power over who gets mentioned and how they get mentioned. So before we get into this final discussion about the media, let's look at what the TRC said about reconciliation in the media.
Call to action number 86. We call upon Canadian journalism programs and media schools to require education for all students on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal Crown relations.
It's really important that we focus on implementing the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, including the one directing, the education system to do better educating future journalists, for example. But we also can't forget about the many, many other commissions, inquiries, reports, investigations, findings about ongoing racism and barriers for Indigenous peoples. And think about the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. They have a very specific call to justice, which is about making sure that the media decolonize all of its approaches in terms of both their work and publications, so that they're better at educating Canadians instead of misinforming Canadians, specifically about Indigenous women and girls and their role in society. So really, it goes beyond the education system, though. Media outlets have to take up that call too. So Kim, I'm going to start with you, because you're all over the media. You're in it, you're behind it, you're producing it, you're writing it. What are some of the issues that you see, some of the problematic issues in how Indigenous peoples are portrayed in the media?
Well, I think it starts with the language and the words that are used. I can give you so many examples just within the last year alone. Because we have Jordin here, let's just start with, there was a news story about the NFL Washington team name, where they had no problem saying the R word 5 times in their news story. I just edited a piece where they used 24 racial slurs to talk about the CFL Edmonton team to change their name. And it just felt so egregious to me. We do have to do better as the media. And I think, those conversations are definitely starting to happen. They've happened, with the public broadcaster, and it's ongoing, and they're very open to feedback. It's happening with St. Joseph's Publications that publish Chatelaine, Maclean's, Canadian Business, Flair, Fashion. They hired me to write an Indigenous style guide. So those tiny little things that don't seem really important are incredibly important, because it changes the narrative and the way our stories are framed.
Well, I mean, all of those things can be major issues to miseducating Canadians about us. Howie, I'd like to get your take on how important, or what role do you see as Indigenous peoples actually being in those roles and helping to bring about the change in media if they're doing the reporting and the writing and the producing?
Well, that's just it. we should be doing all the reporting and writing, and we should be behind. We should have jobs in every form of government and level in media, wherever. That's what we strive to do, and hopefully our youth are striving to do that. I see great change this day, actually. But the thing, unfortunately, with something like media, you know, when Kim says that they use these racial slurs in their stories, it's all part of shock culture. It's try to get the listeners to listen, and we're supposed to, you know, be okay. Well, you've got my attention. That way of thinking needs to change. We can't keep putting those things up just nonchalantly and saying, well, you know, we're going to say this, you know, horrible word, and we're going to use these horrible words to get your attention. We have to think differently. We have to have more pride in ourselves. And I think that's coming. It's not going to be for a while. But yeah, we definitely there's a lot of weight on our youth right now, and they're strong. I've seen the strength in them, and they can pull through, and they can take us into a better future.
Oh, and they already are on the way. And, you know, Jordin, maybe I'll end with you on this panel, because we know that media has now exploded, I should say, into social media. I mean, you can get media from a multitude of sources, and our kids are watching and they're listening and they're seeing themselves portrayed and their heroes portrayed in certain ways. How important is it to you that we don't take our mind off what the youth are seeing and how they're being represented?
Well, a lot of, you know, the social media posts and all that, a lot of people take it out of context, right? And, you know, we as Indigenous people, we don't want people to feel sorry for us, you know, because we're resilient, right? We're gonna overcome hardships. Like, this is just one hurdle that we got to overcome. But at the end of the day, you know, we, the Indigenous people, have to find the strength within inside to share our stories, right? Like, it takes a lot of courage for an individual to come to terms with, you know, whatever that happened to them. And you know, I think when you're in a room and you're face to face and hearing someone's story, it hits you right in the heart, right? Over social media, you know, more often than not, people take it out of context, and you know, we don't want to. You know, when we share some of our experiences, we're not sharing it for you to feel sorry for us. We're sharing it to educate you. We're sharing it to stop one cycle and start a new cycle for our future, for the youth. And like how we said, there's a lot of pressure on the next generation, but we, the parents, have to show the strength and show them that, you know, having discussions at the dinner table as a family is okay, right? It's part of you know, being able to move forward individually. You know, my experience growing up, nothing was ever said at the dinner table. Nothing was ever talked about. You know, hey, how you doing today? How you feeling? I didn't know how to express my feelings until my late 20s, because I never had to share. I held everything in. You know, things are moving forward. I can see it. But you know, we as the parents, you know, in our generation, we got to lead by example. You know, we can all talk the talk, but who's willing to walk the walk? And that's the real question, right? You can talk about all these situations in the media, in the paper, social media, but when push comes to shove, you know, we know that our people are gonna keep marching forward, and we're gonna do it together.
Well, that's really powerful, Jordin. And I think your message that, you know, kids get their first education from us, as parents and grandparents and extended families and communities. And so long as we empower them with positive messages about who they are and how to triumph, then what they're going to see and read in the media, it may still be a problem for a while. We'll knock that down one at a time, but they will be grounded. And I am just so thankful for all three of you. All three of you are just incredible examples of people who have the courage to share, to admit when they have hard times, to admit when they fall down, how they get back up, and to inspire people. And it's like, wow, I could be like Kim or Howie or Jordin. That's absolutely incredible and strong messages for people. And, you know, I just want to thank you all for sharing it. Everything that you've said, there's just so much to think about. But before we wrap up, I want to take a moment so we can hear some last minute reflections from some of these amazing guests that we've had today.
This is a global issue, I think, that everybody everywhere needs to recognize is wrong always, no matter where you live and who we're talking about. It goes even beyond residential schools is our issue of the moment, but missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is the same thing. We were enslaved and nobody talks about it.
Listen, whether it's access to clean drinking water, whatever issues that we have, be informed about what we care about and stand with us.
There is some kind of introductory material that I myself would love to share with other people, just in this way, kind of like we're doing today. I want to thank you guys who've sponsored this talk. You know, it's really helpful, I think, not only for those of us who care so much and who have family members who actually did perish in the residential school system. I got a lot of relatives who went to residential schools. But it's not only important for us, it's also important for settler Canadians, I think. There are 94 calls to action. We can address it specifically, but really, in my heart of hearts, we need to be addressing it globally as a species, you know.
For me, reconciliation is really like, how do we make Canada a safer place for Indigenous people?
I just want the Indigenous community to be involved, respected, and just part of the story that Canada is, and treated as equals. And hopefully we can weave our lives together and our cultures together in a way that's you feel respected.
What does reconciliation look like to you? I mean, I know it's already happening. You're looking at it, but when somebody asks you that as an individual, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, it's friendship. It's a friendship. It's a sharing of your, deepest thoughts. It's listening, most of all, I think, that leads to friendship, right?
I started changing the way of saying it's reconciliation and saying relationship. Yeah. Ask yourself, do you have relationship with Indigenous community around you? And I think if the answer is no, then I think that part of your role in being in reconciliation is building those relationships. And again, I think you're doing an amazing job of doing that. And
thanks, man.
And I'm happy to be in your inner circle.
Thanks, man. It's good to have you a part of it. It really is.
I want to thank our panel, Howie and Kim and Jordin and Pam. I wish we were all together in the same room. It's been a long time since I've seen any of you guys. I want to thank our audience. Whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, there's so much for us to learn. And it's not all horror. A lot of it is great. And I swear they go together. You can handle the tough stuff better if you understand the things that Harriet was talking about, our resilience and our way we can recover this. I swear that we can do it. So I hope that through the work that we're all doing together at Downey Wenjack and beyond, I thank you for your attention and time. I hope you're going to stay engaged with this. The road to reconciliation, it's paved with a lot of hard work that we have to do, but we got to do it anyway. And the fact that we're doing it together, well, I'm very grateful for that. See you guys.
Thank you all so much, Walalan, Ikose. Please continue to Keep doing what you're doing. Keep being these wonderful community leaders that you are. You show so much courage. You've shared so much wisdom here today. And thank you for all the listeners, because we need to keep these conversations going. Keep learning, keep listening, and join us as we create a better future. Thank you specifically to all of our panelists, Kim Wheeler, Howie Miller, Jordin Tootoo, and of course, our amazing guests, Buffy Sainte-Marie, Harriet Visitor, Alan Grey Eyes, Mark Chipman, Dallas Smith, National Chief RoseAnne Archibald, and of course, our elder, Barb Niepanak.
Thanks for listening to Turtle Island Talks, an exclusive SiriusXM Town Hall. Turtle Island Talks is produced by Kim Wheeler, Sarah Burke, Kaylin Belair, and Siobhan Woodrow. For more news, music, and views from Turtle Island, or to hear this show again, search The Indigiverse online and in the SiriusXM app.